Hello, I'm Terrydavidmulligan, and I'm the host producer of the Mulligan Stew podcast and the Terrydavidmulligan YouTube channel. And this story you're about to see and hear is on both of those. It's that important. By the way, it's nominated for an Academy Award. And by the time you actually see this, it may have either won or lost. It doesn't matter. Actually, they've won. They've already won. The two young directors, producers, Julian Brave Noise Cat and Emily Cassie, were side by each journalists at HuffPost. And Emily heard about the story of the abuse at the Kamloops and Sugarcane residential schools many years ago, where kids were taken from their parents off the reserves, and some of them never came back. When graves started to be discovered, then it really took off. That story really took off, and so it should. Emily asked Julian if he would take part in this storytelling and maybe help direct. And he said, "No, I can't do this because, first of all, Sugarcane was the residential school that my father was sent to and abandoned. And it's just too painful." But eventually, as they started to shoot, he got drawn into it. He stepped up in front of the camera. He became the narrator, so to speak. And between the two of them, they got an incredibly difficult story told. And it's heartfelt. There's tears, but there's resilience and there's hope. I hope they win the Academy Award. In the meantime, they won my heart. Here's the story of Sugarcane from Julian and Emily. Julian Brave Noise Cat, director. Emily Cassie, director, producer, cinematographer. All things to the story. The story is Sugarcane, and I'm trying to explain to Emily my connection to the story, which is distant, but it's there. It's very strong for me. My father was the game warden in Kamloops. We drove by that residential school every week, and every week I asked about it. He then became the game warden in Williams Lake, and that's when I first heard about Sugarcane. So I've been close to the story, and I'm part of me that drives me now. I keep asking myself what I could have done, how I could have asked more questions, stuck my nose in. And I didn't get a chance. I was trying to live my other life, which was, being a Mountie and a broadcaster. I'm so pleased that you told this story. What did it ask of you, Julian? What pulled at you to commit to this story and tell it?
Well, the quick answer to that would be actually M.
I pulled at him.
So maybe she should start the origin of the documentary, because I actually did not set out to make a documentary about the subject on my own.
But you thought about it.
I did, yeah, I did, and I think a big part of the reason why I couldn't instigate a project like this is because of how heavy the subject matter is for my family. So without M, I could never have and would never have set off to make a film like this.
Emily, what was your pitch?
So Terry, when the news at Kamloops came out that there was this potential, orchard of unmarked graves on the grounds of the residential school there, I heard the news like everyone else and felt, horrified and at once really just drawn towards the story. And I just felt something like really guttural in me, that this was a story that I felt I needed to understand. And that's because I grew up in Canada, and I'm an investigative journalist and filmmaker who's spent, an entire career looking at human rights abuses and genocide all over the world, in Afghanistan and Rwanda. But I had never looked at what had happened in my own country, to the First Peoples there. And so when this news hit, I just felt like I needed to understand it. And the person I felt who I could most grapple with it with is Julian. And that's because Julian and I worked our first reporting jobs together almost a decade ago. We were randomly sat at the desks next to each other, and we became fast friends. And in the years since, he had become an incredible writer and journalist and storyteller of Indigenous life in North America, and felt like a natural fit. And so I reached out to him, and he said he'd give it some thought. And in the meantime, I went looking for a nation that said they were going to do a search. And I found an article in the Williams Lake Tribune about Chief Willie Sellers in the Williams Lake First Nation. And I reached out to Chief Willie that same day, and he called me back and said, the creator has always had great timing. Just yesterday, our council said, we need someone to document this search. So I talked to council, I got my gear together, I got ready to go. And 2 weeks later, I heard back from Julian.
And Terry, I took a couple weeks, as I was saying, because of the, the subject matter is so heavy for me. I'd also just signed a book contract for a book that's going to come out next October, and I'd never written a book before, and I'd never made a film either, and doing both at the same time felt a little bit irresponsible. So I did need to take some time to think about whether I could make a documentary on this subject at all. And I took the time, and I ultimately felt that if I didn't do this, I would regret it. And so I came back around and said, hey, about that documentary, I'd be open to collaborating with you. And that's when Em told me that she'd identified this First Nation that was leading a search at St. Joseph's Mission near Williams Lake. And when she said that, I couldn't believe what she had just told me, because, of course, as you know, that's the school that my family was sent to, and also where my father, where to the best of my knowledge at the time, was born. So out of 139 Indian residential schools across Canada, Em had happened to choose to focus, or fate, I guess, maybe it happened to focus our documentary on the one school that my family was taken away to and where my father's life began.
I can remember going to the Williams Lake Stampede, and the nation would arrive about noon. Their buckboards had wheels on them, tires. And I thought, that's fantastic. They're coming out of the hills, and they're it's like royalty. I was so impressed. You knew that this story, Julian, would take you back to the one person that you perhaps thought of instantly, which was your father. He was a survivor.
He was born at the school, but he did not attend the school. He went to the day schools, which were the next institutions that they built to acculturate our people. I actually did not assume initially that I would be a participant in the documentary. I was asked to be a collaborator behind the camera, not a participant in front of the camera. And for the first year of filming, we filmed almost nothing from my narrative or my family's narrative. It was not until well into the process that I felt comfortable going there with my family story and with my own story. And a big part of that was my auntie Charlene Bellew, who's also in the documentary. One of the only scenes that we filmed with me in the first year of filming is a scene in the film where she brings me up to the barns at the mission and asks me to help her tell the story of our people and our missing children. And then the other piece of it was I moved in with my dad for 2 years while we worked on the film, and I wrote my book. And, it became very clear that he had a lot of questions that he, wanted to ask, if not find answers to. And I felt that I was in a position to help him do that at the same time as, doing so would help me sort out my own stuff with him, as you see in the film. And then finally, watching survivors like the late Chief Rick Gilbert do incredibly brave things and share some of their most vulnerable truths made me feel as though, if I was here with my own story that cut to the core of what happened to the babies born at St. Joseph's Mission, which is, until our documentary, an unreported, unknown, undocumented story, I felt that I wasn't going to be giving this documentary my all if I didn't go there with that truth. And I'm ultimately glad that we did, not just from like a documentarian perspective, but also from a life perspective.
Sure. Emily, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we set off to make a film together that encapsulated a community in a moment of reckoning. And we created a really shared vision for what that should feel like and how it should reflect this kind of epic world that was at both grand and intimate. And I think the thing we didn't expect was that Julian and his dad would become the heart of the story in so many ways. And it was such a beautiful journey with them and such an honor to get to be a part of it. And just took a lot of trust between me and Jules and building that over time to get to go and be a part of, their familial reckoning. And we went on this amazing road trip and it was a lot of fun. And yeah, there were tough moments and you see those in the film, but it was also a hell of a time. And there was a lot of love and a lot of joy. And I think for me, I was profoundly moved that, despite nearly every, tool of institutional abuse being used to break down communities and a people, it was the strongest community I had ever witnessed, and people fighting and loving their way back together. And it was just extraordinary to bear witness to that.
I wrote one of the first notes that I wrote off to the corner, but I knew that that's where I wanted to have my eye fall on it. How did you make the camera disappear? Because you can't, this is almost impossible to do, is just walk in and shoot. You have to embed yourself. You have to become part of that community. You have to earn their trust. They've carried these stories with them for their entire life and don't tell their own family these stories. How did you do that? How did you open that door?
You want to go? You want me to go?
You should go.
I think it was about time and trust and patience. And, we decided to film this as a verite project. So we decided that we weren't going to do sit down interviews. We did one at the beginning with Rick Gilbert, and we realized very quickly that it wasn't the right way to approach this story, and that it felt too it was just too soon for him to go there. And he had, a reaction sharing some of his traumas in the beginning. And we just realized that we needed to really build that trust over time. And so we lived in community for 3 years and became a part of it and participated and had a reciprocal relationship. And, I picked up Chief Willie's kids from hockey practice and, hung out with Rick at night and watched American Idol, which was his favorite show, and just like made space for people. And I think we talked a lot about the history of documentary film being one that's very extractive and particularly toward Native people. There's Nanook of the North, the first documentary about the Inuit up in Canada. And it was just incredibly reductive and patronizing and you might say racist. And we needed this to be a refutation of that. And the only way to do that was to get under the skin of this thing and be a part of the community and let people live their lives and speak for themselves.
I mean, just knowing that it would drive you forward. You were committed anyway, but just, Julian, are we anywhere near reconciliation?
I think that a better question is, are we anywhere near the truth? I think that often people want to get to the reconciliation part of the agenda before we've, gotten to the truth of the matter. And I think one of the instructive things about our documentary Sugarcane is that, it's not like there was not a historical record about this institution. There was multiple books written about St. Joseph's Mission and the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, who operated the missions in what is now British Columbia. There were multiple criminal cases that came out of this institution, including sexual abuse of children in the 1990s. And despite that pretty significant body of documentation of this history, until our documentary, there was no film or other media that told the story of what happened to the babies that were born at St. Joseph's Mission. And if that's true at this school, what might be true at the 138 other schools across Canada, and what might be true at the 417 federally funded schools across the United States, where there has been, no parallel level of truth and healing and reconciliation and accountability as there has been in Canada. So, I think that, while I understand the desire to get to the reconciliation part of the agenda, and I do believe very strongly in the necessity for First Nations peoples to reconcile amongst ourselves, within our own families and communities. I think that we still have a lot to learn about what actually happened at the Indian residential schools.
I had someone in conversations use the phrase, thank you for that, use the phrase, well, it's a Canadian story. And I went, it literally came out of my chair. No, it's not. There are no borders here. And this story will never, ever go away unless we show the truth, tell the truth, live the truth.
Yeah, one of the unfortunate things about the way that this story was covered when it broke international headlines was as a Canadian story, particularly in the United States press. It was an opportunity, it seemed, for the Americans to go, oh my God, look at what Canada did, which was incredibly ignorant with respect to the history that happened here, where not only were there nearly 3 times as many institutions, but actually the American system inspired and influenced the Canadian one, where there was one of the primary institutions that was most influential in the creation of educational acculturation systems was the Carlisle Industrial School in Pennsylvania, created by a former Brigadier General Richard Henry Pratt, who described the mission of those schools as to, quote, kill the Indian, save the man. And that was the exact same, ideology and model that was, that was behind the Indian residential school system in Canada. And, I think that it's really important for people to understand this as a North American story and also as a global story, because there were similar institutions with essentially the same mission that existed all across the world in settler states like Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Australia, and many other places.
Emily, I just want to mention, and because they should be mentioned, Charlene Billow and Whitney Spearing, who were the investigators that were working on the story and just about finding those graves. It just lifted everything. It drove that narration forward, and I knew that somebody had documented, done the hard work of documenting the disappearance of children, and there they were, and it was a whole other driving force with this story. How are they doing? Are they getting their investigation complete?
Well, Charlene Bellew has been doing this work for over 30 years. She's a hero. She's a civil rights hero. She has pushed this issue as hard as anyone has. A survivor of the school herself. She has not stopped. She has been part of every major court case that has come out of the residential schools, particularly in BC and at St. Joseph's Mission. And the work has just not stopped for her, even though she's now in her 70s. Like, she is intrepid and committed, and yeah, she's just remarkable. And her and Whitney just went through and we did this alongside them, just thousands of documents from all of these archives. And it's like finding a needle in a haystack to find, little bits of information that could, speak to the abuse that happened, trying to find a death record of a kid that they know didn't go home, and where were they buried. And if it doesn't say a burial, could they be buried at the mission? And if they were buried at the mission, was it inside the Catholic cemetery or not? And just connecting these dots and finding the adoption records. And it's unbelievable, the scope of work that they've done. They are not done, but their first report is coming out in the next few months on the work that they've done thus far. But they will continue that work until they find answers. And our hope is that, the federal government in Canada has been funding these searches so far. And we hope that that continues. Of course, we don't know if that will continue. If a new government comes in, there's a lot of pressure in Canada to move on from this, to not have public funding going to this. And there's no equivalent, of course, in the US. And so that is our hope. And we also hope that Charlene is honored in the many ways in which she deserves to be. And she's doing great. And she's really proud of the film. And she's been able to travel with us a bit. And we keep her updated on everything. And she's doing a million things at once. She's an extraordinary woman.
Julian, when does your book come out?
October of 2025. It'll be published by Alfred A. Knopf in the US and Penguin Random House Canada in Canada, as well as in the UK and Commonwealth and France and Germany.
Does it work in partnership with this film somehow?
No, it's a different story.
Do you want to be a writer or you want to be a filmmaker?
Writing is my primary background and occupation. I'll continue to make films. I'd be open to making another documentary, to writing scripts and all that sort of stuff. I appreciate and enjoy storytelling in many different ways, shapes, and forms, but writing is my bread and butter and also my primary source of income.
Did you at some point, I'll just ask this quickly, did the thought cross your mind, how would I have responded if I was given a number instead of a name? How would I have responded to the shame and the guilt had you been in those schools? What do you think your character would have been?
Well, I don't think that I have to think about what it would have been like for me to be in those schools. I think that the schools influenced the shape and contours of my life in many ways, despite the fact that I was at them. And I think that that's a big part of the point of the documentary is not to, understand this history as past, but to understand it as something that still fundamentally shapes Indigenous life in Canada and the United States and society more broadly. I think I have lived a life of, relative opportunity and privilege. I had the opportunity to go get educated, et cetera. But, my dad decided to move away from the reservation because of, the circumstances around his birth and the hard upbringing that he had, and moved as far away as he could imagine, which happened to be New York in the United States, which is where he met my mother. So if it were not for the residential school experience and the circumstances of his birth, I probably would not exist. And furthermore, he ultimately, didn't know how to be a parent. He's a very loving guy, but he didn't know how to be a dad. And that's because there were, multiple generations, 4 or 5 generations within our family where, our people were denied that right to parent our own children. And so, of course, when it was his turn to try to do that, he didn't know how to do it. And, I also really fear that I might inherit the same, sort of challenges. I didn't know what it was to grow up with a dad. And, I have my own anxieties about what I might be like someday when I have my own kids.
Yeah. A couple of things you might not know. You know that the film will be screened on National Geographic December the 9th, and then Disney Plus December the 10th, but it'll also be screened winter of 2024-25 in Disney Plus in Canada. So that happened overnight. That's very cool. Well, why would I assume you wouldn't know about your own film? But I just wrote it down because it's fantastic, because the more lives that are informed by this, all the better.
Thank you.
And I will mention that the National Indian Residential School Crisis Line in Canada is 1-866-925-4419. At the Critics' Choice Awards, you were up for 8 nominations, which in itself is a confirmation that we loved the film. But you won for Best Political. Stopping the Steal and Bad River was in there as well. And you won for Best True Crime. The Jinx, Stopping the Steal, and Black Box was in there as well. 8 nominations. I actually thought, I'll just say this personally, that you were the perfect pair to win Best New Director. I mean, you won the director prize at Sundance, so I thought we would carry on. But I'm just so pleased that you put your lives into this film, years into this film, and it's turned out to be the success that it is.
Thanks,
Thank you
Terry.
so much, Terry.
Yeah, it meant the world, it means the world that the film is being recognized in the way that it is. It meant a lot for it to get, those kind of hard-hitting titles of political documentary. Like this is not just a story of the past, it's a very urgent story of the present where communities are still suffering from the ramifications. This is a largely unknown story of a continent-wide genocide and child separation program that has affected generations of families, and no one seems to know about it. And so we are just feel so lucky that people will now know, and that the record will be corrected, and also that it's able to start helping Indigenous communities grapple with, their own stories and familial traumas that they might want to start talking about.
Well, time itself will take care of our generation, and I'm glad that you're there and that you're the age that you can carry it on through your life. It's fantastic. I hope you enjoy the reactions that we'll see and get for the next number of years, and I hope it changes everything. It's just my hopes. That's all. I'm just pinning my hopes on you.
Thanks, Terry. And thank you again for sharing your personal connection to the schools and to Williams Lake and Kamloops. I think that part of this is also, getting people who were around at the time to grapple with what was happening in our society back then and its ramifications today. And so we really appreciate your sharing and vulnerability on that.
Thank you very much.